Hello everyone, I'm Christina Marie, this is Crystal's Creations. Thank you for coming to my channel. If you're not already, please subscribe, like, share, comment below. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. Today I am going to read the first 2 pages of a very inspirational book called No Mud, No Lotus, written by Han. For us in the chronic pain world, we know what it means to learn suffering and sadness. We do it all the time without even realizing it. This book very much has helped me throughout my journey, and I want to share a couple pages of it with you. I have a lot of my earlier videos that quote a lot of Han because for the fact of the title, No Mud, No Lotus. The lotus flower is the most coveted flower in, that part of the world. It is represented with deities and gods and femininity, and it grows in mud and poop. Imagine what we could become if we were to learn how to transform ourselves. No mud, no lotus. People are afraid of suffering, but suffering is a kind of mud to help the lotus flower of happiness grow. There can be no lotus flower without the mud. Reading this book is a lot like reading my life. It is so beautiful, and I hope that these pages inspire you to want to try to transform into something beautiful. We all want to be happy. And there are many books and teachers in the world that try to help people to be happy, yet we continue to suffer. Therefore, many of us think that we're doing it wrong. Somehow we are failing at happiness, and that isn't true. Being able to enjoy happiness doesn't require that we have zero suffering. In fact, the art of happiness is also the art of suffering well. When we learn to acknowledge, embrace, and understand our suffering, we suffer much, much less. Not only that, but we're also able to go further and transform our suffering into understanding, compassion, and joy for finding ourselves and for finding others. One of the most difficult things for us to accept is that there is no realm where there's only happiness and there's no suffering. This doesn't mean that we should despair. Suffering can be transformed. As soon as we open our mouths to say suffering, we know that the opposite of suffering is already there as well. Where there is suffering, there's happiness. According to the creation of the Bible book of Genesis, God said, "Let there be light." I like to imagine that light replied, saying, "God, I have to wait for my twin brother darkness to be with me. I can't be there without the darkness," God asked. "Why do you need to wait? Darkness is there." And light answered, "In that case, I am there too." If we focus exclusively on pursuing happiness, we may regard suffering as something to be ignored or resisted. We think of it as something that gets in the way of our happiness. But the art of happiness is also, and at the same time, the art of knowing how to suffer well. If we know how to use our suffering we can transform it and suffer much less. Knowing how to suffer well is essential to realizing true happiness. When we suffer, we tend to think that suffering is all there is at the moment. And happiness belongs to some other time or some other place. People often ask, why do I have to suffer? Thinking we should be able to have a life without any suffering is eluded. As thinking we should be able to have left side without a right side. The same is true in thinking we have a life in which no happiness whatsoever can be found. If the left side said, right, you need to go away, there's no place for you here, that would be nonsense, because then the left would have to stop existing as well. There is no right, there is no left. So where there is no suffering, there can be no happiness either, and vice versa. If we can learn to see and skillfully engage with both the presence of happiness and the presence of suffering, we will go in the direction of enjoying life more. Every day we go a little farther in that direction, and eventually we realize that suffering and happiness are not two separate things. Cold air can be painful if you aren't wearing enough warm clothes. But when you are feeling overheated or walking outside with your proper clothes, the bracing sensation of cold air can be a source of feeling joy and alive. Suffering isn't some kind of external objective source of oppression and pain. There might be things that cause you to suffer, such as loud music or bright lights, which may bring other people joy. There are things that bring you joy that annoy other people. The rainy day that ruins your plans for a picnic will boon a farmer's parched fields. Happiness is possible right now, today. But happiness cannot be without suffering. Some people think that in order to be happy, they must avoid all suffering. And so they are constantly vigilant, constantly worrying, and they end up sacrificing all their spontaneity, their freedom, and their joy. This is incorrect. If you can recognize and accept your pain without running away from it, you will discover that although pain is there, joy can be found at the same time. Some say that suffering is only an illusion, or that to live wisely, we have to transcend both suffering and joy. I say the opposite. The way to suffer well and be happy is to stay in touch with what you are actually doing. So you will gain liberating insight into the true nature of suffering